Woman buried in Avalanche Flatlines comes back with harrowing story. All it takes is 1 foot of snow to kill you. Like concrete, it sets on top of you, restricting your movements, and without some assistance, you're in trouble. As time passes, the carbon dioxide from your breath collects in a small pocket in front of your mouth, ensuring you eventually have no fresh air to take in. It's dark, lonely, and suffocating, and it's where Rihanna Shaw found herself after a devastating ski accident. Rihanna Shaw was living her life to the fullest at the young age of 22. She lived in Chichester, West Sussex, in the United Kingdom, but wanted to enjoy the ski season abroad. Her journey led her to Ischgl, Austria, where the snow was calling her name and waiting to pull her in. In 2012, she and 5 of her friends arrived at the St. Anton ski resort, where they planned to enjoy their snowy vacation for the next 2 weeks. Right away, there were problems. There was a shortage of snow in the area, which made skiing harder than normal and less enjoyable for the more experienced and daring, like Rihanna and her friends. They hoped for some greater snowy action, and they got their wish when a heavy storm blew into town. For 2 days straight, no one at the resort could ski due to a terrible snowstorm. When the danger subsided, a thick, fresh coat of snow gleamed throughout the Alps region. It was a beauty for most people, and for Rihanna and her friends, it was a call to action. The 6 friends were trained in skiing and avalanche safety, so they felt prepared for the worst-case scenarios. There was a rush of excitement as they finally hit the slopes after 2 days stuck in a snowstorm, so they all threw caution to the mountain and let loose. Rihanna and her friend Gordon went ahead of the others, but they all wound up meeting along the slope. Rather than staying in the piste where they'd be closer to the resort, they went off to a remote area where they could be as wild as they wanted. As risky as they were acting, they weren't completely going in blind. The area that Rihanna, Gordon, and their friends headed for was one they had been to before. The familiarity would still not spare them from danger. In hindsight, going unprepared into an area they nicknamed Death Valley was definitely not the best plan, but they felt safe enough to let loose. As they sped across the snow, some on skis, others on boards, Rihanna was the most daring as she picked up speed, not seeing what was coming at her. It was another skier. They collided into each other at ferocious speeds, and Rihanna went flying in the other direction, losing her skis completely. As she stumbled, she was hit with a spray of snow, and when she realized the source, she started to panic. Rihanna thought the snow was accidentally sprayed from one of her friends, but the snow pushed her with such power she started to realize what was happening. An avalanche trapped her. The heavy snow that pushed down against her body made it impossible for Rihanna to move or breathe. Then there was a feeling of falling as the avalanche swept her away for at least 150 meters before she finally stopped moving entirely. There was an eerie, dampening silence. Rihanna had a sense of what went wrong. The Alps were already prone to avalanches, but the freshly fallen snow had made any activity especially dangerous. The collision with her friend triggered the whole event, and Rihanna recognized the grim reality: she had only a few minutes to live. Specifically, she knew because of the avalanche training that she and her friends went through that she had only about 11 minutes before her family would be planning her funeral. A couple minutes passed and Rihanna, completely trapped, was not feeling so well. Someone needed to find her and pull her out. Naturally, anyone's first instinct would be to pull themselves out, but snow is not as easy to escape from as people may think. Like wet cement, snow can become solid quickly, and with a few feet at least weighing her down, there was no hope in Rihanna saving herself. Meanwhile, her friends on the surface gathered together. Because of how far the avalanche had pushed her, it was a challenge for the boys to find her without tracking equipment. All they had were their hands to dig. Quickly, they formed a brilliant idea that did the job. The boys formed a line and systematically searched through all the snow. They spotted one of Rihanna's skis, which helped them pinpoint where she was. Still, the search was taking much too long. As they dug through the snow inch by inch, they couldn't help but feel they were too late. Back in the snow, Rihanna's phone began to ring, but the call went unanswered. She called out for help as she began to feel faint of breath. The suffocating pressure of being buried so deep in the snow was too much for her. She had to do something, or perish. Although she could see some light from the surface, she could hear no one around her. Her calls for help wouldn't reach any living ears, so she finally called it. She accepted her fate. She was going to die. There was nothing left to do but wait for darkness. But then, still stuck, Rihanna's mind wandered and she saw something out of the ordinary. "I started walking along a pathway in this peaceful pale forest," she recalled. It had big tall evergreens on either side. It looked like there was some kind of snow on the ground, but not like snow as we know it. Then she woke up. Rihanna suddenly found herself above the snow in the arms of her friend Gordon. He hugged her tightly, saying how grateful he was that she was alive. She couldn't help but make a joke of how clingy he was, but she herself was grateful, especially to her friends who managed to save her life. She was barely hanging on. In the snow, Rihanna had spent a few minutes conscious, then stopped breathing. It wasn't until about 20 minutes later that she was pulled out from her frozen prison. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips a dark purple, and without a clear pulse, they could have declared her dead right then. But the boys held on to hope. One of the 5 men began performing CPR on Rihanna. As grim as the situation was, Rihanna came back from wherever it was she'd gone. Emergency services arrived and immediately took care of her. Soon she was back home in England, but nothing was the same. Rihanna was aware of how lucky she was. Few ever survive an ordeal like the one she endured, but more than that, it's brought a change into her life. She didn't plan on giving up her skiing, but she did commit to being just a little safer on her next trip. Believe it or not, she knew she could have suffered worse fates on that mountain, like spending 80 minutes in freezing water. Rihanna knew of Anna Bagenholm, who crashed into a frozen river. Her body temperature dropped to an impossible 56.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and her rescue required years and years of therapy. An orthopedic surgeon, her residency in Narvik, Norway, put her on the slopes in the first place. Perhaps it was because Anna knew the slopes so well, although she hadn't skied on them since the year before, that she felt confident and didn't pay close attention to where she twisted and turned in 1999. Unfortunately, Anna quickly lost control of her skis. She veered off the side of the slope and fell headfirst onto a layer of ice on a frozen stream near a waterfall, landing on her back, which created a hole in the ice that Anna immediately sunk into. The freezing water enveloped her beneath the ice that was 8 inches thick, and when her friends arrived at the scene, they only saw her skis. Each grabbing a leg, they tried pulling Anna out. After 7 minutes of struggling, when they still couldn't get her head above the surface, they turned to their cell phones for help. They waited and waited, holding onto Anna's legs and skis so she wouldn't slip under the ice completely. Meanwhile, Anna had found a little air pocket that allowed her to breathe. Time was running out rapidly. After 40 minutes, she lost consciousness due to circulatory arrest, and it wasn't until 7:40 p.m. that the rescue team was able to pull her out and perform CPR on her. By that time, she'd been in the freezing cold water for 80 minutes. When she was lifted into the helicopter, her pupils were dilated, her blood was not circulating, and she wasn't breathing. The emergency team continued CPR and oxygen ventilation during the flight, but they didn't arrive at the hospital until 9:10 p.m. There, Dr. Mads Gilbert, an anesthesiologist and the chief of the hospital's emergency room, tried resuscitating her. He had his work cut out for him. Her body temperature was the lowest ever recorded at 56.7 degrees Fahrenheit. The average is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Gilbert commented on Anna's state. She has completely dilated pupils. She is ashen, flaxen white. She's wet. She's ice cold when I touch her skin, and she looks absolutely dead. But he wouldn't declare her so until her body was warm. Hundreds of doctors and nurses worked tirelessly for over 9 hours to bring her back to life. At 9:40 p.m., she was hooked up to a machine that warmed her blood outside her body. At 10:15, her first heartbeat was recorded. On May 30th, she finally woke up, but not to a speedy or easy recovery. In fact, she was paralyzed from the neck down and was angry with her colleagues for rescuing her. "I feared a meaningless life without any dignity," she said. Miraculously, her dignity didn't remain a question for long. As time passed, she overcame her paralysis, but not without worries. She remained in the ICU because her kidneys were malfunctioning. Dr. Steen at the National Hospital in Oslo said it was an extraordinary medical achievement. He theorized that she recovered because her metabolism slowed so much in the cold water that her body needed less oxygen. Despite everything Anna had been through, she suffered no brain damage, which Dr. Gilbert said was likely due to the extensive CPR she'd received. She returned to work in October that year, ready to meet the doctors and nurses who saved her life. When you're a patient, you're not thinking you're going to die, you think I'm going to make it. But as a medical person, I think it's amazing that I'm alive, Anna explained. Only minor symptoms of neural damage in her hands and feet remained. These days, Anna is not only a case study but a certified surgeon, and amazingly, she still hits the slopes. She is living, skiing proof that even when a lot of time has gone by, with the right conditions, survival is still an option.